Yeah, I was just talking about DVDs with one of my friends yesterday, and just like, do you remember the last time you used a DVD? Like, what a pain in the ass that is.
I know. You actually
Like,
have to put a device, put it in a device, and like find the physical disc,
and then it loads.
Yeah.
And then there's like, the FBI warnings and the other things that you can't skip past. And then there's the previews, and you have to skip each one individually. And 7 minutes later, you arrive at the main menu, but you're not done selecting. You don't get to watch yet.
You still, and you might have to take off subtitles because some of them are just like defaulted to have, they're in Chinese, dubbed in Chinese, and they have English subtitles, and you're like, the hell?
And it's not like you hit like audio feature and it just immediately goes to it. It's like, okay, give me about 30 seconds to load.
I know. Not super intuitive, are they?
Man.
Yeah. God, we had it rough when we were in college. Like,
how
did we survive?
I don't know. Hello, and welcome to Middleish, the podcast about moderation in all things. I am Michael Gray.
And I am Erin Green. Your hair looks great.
Does it look great?
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
Okay, good. I was fixing it as I was introing, which Erin didn't need to say, but she did. And so here we are.
However, if you're watching on YouTube, you would have seen that.
No, because that part's always cut out. That's where the logo goes.
Yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, sorry I called you out. But if there's anything about Middleish, it's that we're real people.
That's right. And one of the real things about me is that I'm pretty finicky with my hair. So it's a thing. I'm not worried about it.
Especially when he's about to get on a rant and he doesn't have a hat on. Then it's like, okay, there's a little bit of hair touching and playing. Like, we've got to prep ourselves. Here we go. Going in.
That's funny. There's all these things that I don't realize I do that are so wonderfully being pointed out.
We all do. We all do them. I do things too.
I'm not going to ever play poker with you because you'll be like, yeah, here's his tells. I know his tells already.
Well, I'm not a poker player, so I don't know if I would be good at poker.
Me either.
I'm sure I have tells. I'm sure everybody does. It's just a matter of becoming aware of them and then changing that subconscious behavior. I mean, how hard is that to change something you don't even know you do, like a little twitch or a little, scratch your nose or whatever. I don't know.
Or if you're like, wow, I have really good cards. Like that would be a tell that everyone would
say it out loud. Like you don't have an inner monologue anymore. And so you just are saying like, 4 hearts. Woo.
Yeah. I'm going to clean house on this one. Like those would be things that would probably give away your hand.
Probably. Yeah.
Just going out on a limb. I was thinking this morning how like I really like this new format we're doing, but it feels like a long time in between when we get to do this.
I know.
Like I was setting up, all my podcast stuff, and I was like, geez, it feels like it's been forever since I've set this stuff up and done this. So I missed that part of it for sure.
I do too. And Matt was asking me last night, how we like this new format, how it's working. And I was like, I think it's going really well because I do like having more time on a specific topic. I think
same.
That's been fun. And I think we've, it's only been a couple months. And so it feels like it's been a while because usually we would have recorded 8 podcasts by now.
We've done 2.
But we've done 2. We've done some Instagram lives, which have been fun, I think. And we tend to get decent engagement on those. And we just did one with Dr. Nadolski for last month, talking about like heart health and just overall health. And I do like having a little more time to spend just conveying the message, answering questions, digging a little deeper into some of these issues instead of just like hopping from one episode to the next. And it is less work weekly for each of us, I think. Like not
it's a lot less,
producing and editing and posting a podcast. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Since this isn't like our main gig, it's kind of like, it's like parenting. Like you're excited for when your kids grow and they start doing new things, but then you miss the old stuff they used to do because that was really fun. So it's just kind of like that, it's bittersweet as we grow together. Yeah.
And we can always change it back and we can always do, that's the cool thing.
Okay. Let's change it back.
It can be,
I was kidding.
Okay. Well, there's that. guess we know who the boss is in this.
We've tried it for 2 months.
But we can always change it. I mean, that's the cool thing about creating is you can make it whatever you want. And I think as long as we get feedback from all of you, because you're the reason we're doing this, the listeners, the viewers, and I think one of the biggest concerns was that we would isolate our listeners on, strictly the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. Because if we're doing more Instagram engagement, that might not be where they want, to go to get this information. And so that is a risk, and we're aware of that. And so if you're an avid listener and you really miss that monthly or that weekly podcast, and now it's only monthly, and you're like, I want more, let us know and we'll see what we can do to accommodate that kind of thing. So, and
also check us out on Instagram, because we're doing quite a bit more there. So that may help scratch that itch, for sure.
Yeah.
I have got some feedback. Well, yeah, just let me say this to piggyback on Aaron. Please let us know what you're thinking here. If you're enjoying it, because this isn't just about what we're wanting. We want this to feel like a good rhythm and, accessible in the ways that you would like it to be accessible. And we know this is a different topic or a different format from how most podcasts work. And we're trying something out and we feel like it's going to be beneficial, but you kind of determine that. So we have got some feedback that people are really liking it. Sitting with something for 4 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever. It's just helping people, just have the chance to really kind of adopt a lot of these things, practice these things, do some of these exercises that we talk about, mental exercises, ways to apply things. And we've gotten some good feedback. So as far as we know, people are enjoying it, but if not, let us know. And if so, let us know too. Yeah. Just give us feedback. We always really appreciate that. It helps us make a better show for you all.
Yeah.
Speaking of show,
something to share? Were you going to share feedback that we got?
It was from like 3 weeks ago, so I don't remember what it was, but it was just essentially,
never mind.
I don't even remember who it was, to be honest. I think it was a comment on maybe a reel we did like 3 weeks ago, but it was just basically, hey, I'm really enjoying the new format. I really like sitting with these topics for longer. It was
good.
Essentially that. Yeah. Which is really cool. Okay. Yeah. You want to, should we dive in or you want to catch up real quick? Why don't you tell us about your trip real quick?
Oh yeah. I went to Tucson. Mm-hmm. Well, I think last time we recorded, I had also had a trip to Mexico. That was fantastic, except that
Aaron just takes a trip every time.
Every month. Yeah.
So every time we record, she's like, I just got back from.
The trip to Tucson was because I had I was going down there every year for a training camp when I was racing professionally. Mm-hmm. And obviously I didn't go in 2020 because there was no traveling, and 2021 didn't work out. And so I was like, I miss my Tucson friends and just that, the dirty tea, like the gritty kind of like go down there and get some warmth. Yeah. So, people who live there call it the dirty tea too. So it's not just me. So I had made plans to go down in the fall and I had to cancel those plans. And then I was in touch with some friends who had stayed with us last summer and they're expecting their first baby. And I was just texting with her one night and I was like, God, I would love to come see you guys, before the baby arrives. And she's like, what are you waiting for? Like, come down, we have a spare room. And so I started kind of looking, I'm like, I have tons of miles from like credits that I've canceled. So I just went, stayed with them for a week, hung out with them, got to see friends that live there in Tucson that I haven't seen for a while, and rode my bike up Mount Lemmon, which is there's 5 different distinct ecosystems on Lemmon, which makes it so unique. Like you go from the desert floor and then you go through like, I think it's like grass prairie land, and then you go through like the rock formations, and then you go up into alpine, and like there's all these 5 distinct ecosystems, which is super cool, and it's just a great ride, and so anyway, I had a great time. Good food and
good
chill
weather.
Reading. Weather was great. I had like one kind of stormy day in the afternoon that was just reading weather, so it's kind of nice, just like tuck into a chair and relax. So it was very nice. Thank you for asking.
You are welcome for asking.
And I also wanted to just share that I came home last night and my husband was like, "Have you looked in your office?" And I'm like, "No, not since I left, earlier this afternoon." And he's like, "Go look in your office." So he does photography and videography primarily for Albertsons, but ends up doing like a lot of food stuff and floral photography. And he always brings home the flowers whenever he does a floral shoot. And he brought home this cute little arrangement
some
of
daisies. Some
and
daisies.
I said, "That's really," and there's a dark chocolate bar with it, which is one of my favorites.
Go, Matt.
I know. And I was like, "That's sweet. What was that for?" And he said, "Because I knew you'd like it." And I was like, "Oh, good man." So shout out to thoughtful gestures that, and
Absolutely.
he's like, I love that I can bring you free shit and you just appreciate it. And I was like, why would I need you to buy me these things if there's pretty flowers?
Only counts if you paid for it.
Free chocolate bar, like bring it on, It's even better.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
well, nice.
You had a trip too.
You got some sunshine inside too.
I did. Sunshine all around. Yeah.
Yeah, we went camping for spring break. Up in Garner State Park, which is about 5.5 hours away, kind of little northwest of San Antonio. We went up there with like 7 or 8 different families.
Oh, wow.
All kinds of kids and people we knew. And yeah, it was fun. A couple of cold nights. 5 nights is a lot in a tent. I'm learning, but we survived. We all came home pretty tired, but we're good. We had a good time.
With two kids and a dog. Did you take your dog?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, there were a couple of rough nights, but we survived. Beautiful weather during the day. Lots of time in the river and hiking. And yeah, it was good. It was good. We were exhausted, but we had a lot of fun. So
good.
Yeah.
Nice.
Good. Well, shall we get going here?
Yeah, we have a topic.
We do have a topic. And that topic is the official, well, at this point, the official title. We'll see if it changes. But just this idea that your weight is not your health, that weight and health are not, it's not in like an equation, but they, weight equals health. And we've talked about this before. We kind of dove into this some on in our diet culture episode, which was 2 months ago. That was February's topic. But we're just going to kind of explore it further. And it's just this idea that when we think about getting healthier, usually the biggest priority in our minds is lose weight. There's just this unspoken thing that if you're going to get healthier, you should probably weigh less, regardless of any other information. That's just the assumption, right? And so you can have someone who is, whose weight will not in any way impact their health, 10, 20 pounds up or down, whatever. You can have someone who has good, blood markers and is feeling pretty okay, but start obsessing over their health because they think that that's what they need to change to be a healthier person.
Their weight.
And so
start obsessing over their weight.
Sorry, their weight. Yes, I misspoke there. Their weight.
Yeah.
And so today we just want to spend time looking at how do we begin to separate these two topics? How do we begin to look at, making healthy improvements and not automatically shove weight loss in every aspect along the way? So that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And it goes along with, if you've been listening to us for a while, you'll be hearing some repeat themes in here. And I always preface my nutrition consults and my coaching consults with, I'm not a weight loss dietitian, as in I don't focus on weight as the primary metric we're going to be monitoring to determine if you're making progress. And in fact, I tell people weight loss is not something we do. It's not a behavior. You don't have direct control over what that scale says and what your body does. You have direct control over, how you prioritize your time, what kinds of foods you bring into your home, what you learn about cooking new foods and trying new foods. You have control over, choices you make at a restaurant or the kinds of activities you engage in. So these are things that you have control over. And yes, they often will have an impact on body weight, but not always. And if you get stuck in that thought that weight loss equals health, think of how maddening it is to focus on trying to change something you don't actually have direct control over. And that's your BMI or your health or your weight. We talked about this on a previous podcast that like 80% of your body weight is determined by genetics, environment, upbringing, your weight history, your health status. There's all these things that you don't necessarily have control over that determine your adult weight, like where your body likes to land. And yeah, you have some control over other things, your behaviors and, the kinds of choices you make, but really we don't have as much control as we think we do. And so that's where this fallacy comes in, that people really focus in on the weight and the weight loss. And I'm like, but you're missing the bigger picture here of total health. And so we'll talk about some specific things, specific behaviors, the evidence that says like, these are the healthy behaviors that you actually do have control over that lead to better health.
Right. And it's a good distinction that you made. And, we've talked about this, kind of more in depth on our behaviors and outcomes episode. That was a while ago, but it's a good point. And I'm glad you brought it up. I just want to kind of highlight a little bit that we often look at weight loss like it's a behavior, right? And it's not, it's an outcome, and not even necessarily an outcome we should necessarily shoot for. It's just an outcome of a bunch of different processes in the body. Some that, like Aaron said, some we have control over, some we don't, but it's an outcome. It's the result of a bunch of different things, right? It's not the things. And so weight loss isn't a behavior. So like Aaron said, weight loss isn't something we do. What we do is, we try to get more exercise in. We try to be conscious about, hunger and fullness cues. We, try to eat more nutrient dense foods and just take better care of ourselves. And that yields whatever, result it yields, right? Again, that we don't have control over. But it's just important, I think, to just highlight that weight loss isn't a behavior. Weight loss isn't a thing you just go do. Like, I'm going to lose 5 pounds. Okay, I lost 5 pounds. Like, that's not how it works. And so what's important is, like Aaron's saying, is if that's an outcome, right, then we need to focus more on what are the behaviors that we actually have direct control over. What are things we can do on a daily basis that we can determine that will actually shift our health in a positive direction. So yeah, just wanted to piggyback on that, because I think that's an important point.
Yeah. And that probably brings us to talking about, why do we even look at weight as a metric? Well, a lot of you are familiar with BMI, body mass index. It's basically looking at a proportionate standard of someone's weight to their height. So for how tall you are, is your weight falling in these different categories that then lead to diagnoses and contribute to a plan of action on somebody's, health risk in a clinical setting. BMI is super easy and accessible and quick. It's a screening tool. It is not, yes, it's used, unfortunately, in diagnostic settings. So like, that's how we diagnose obesity and different things. But it does not tell the story. It's one piece of the puzzle. And honestly, there's a huge camp of practitioners out there that think that BMI needs to be just like cast aside altogether and not really looked at. I think that waist circumference is a more important metric personally. And it drives me bonkers that the insurance industry and like the healthcare industry doesn't actually use that as a diagnostic tool, because that has far more implications to metabolic health than just strict BMI. So when we're looking at BMI and just a person's weight, it's one piece of the puzzle. So for example, if somebody has excess body fat, which BMI does not tell us, by the way. So if somebody has excess body fat, and we see this collection of other comorbidities like high fasting blood glucose or hyperlipidemia or hypertension, high blood pressure, then yeah, we're looking at like, well, the weight, the excess body fat is probably contributing to the progression of these different health risks and could be a factor. So let's look at, and this is what we're going to get to. We're not just going to look at you need to lose weight in order to improve these metrics. How are you going to get there? How are you going to improve your health risk? What behaviors do we see? And that's we'll get to that, but just saying this is why we use weight and BMI, because there is a connection. It's just, honestly, it's pretty unclear if it's like the chicken or egg theory kind of thing. Like, does the excess body fat actually lead to some of these health risks, or do these health risks kind of start manifesting like the impaired fasting blood glucose or hypertension or all these other things? And it ends up leading to excess body fat because of how it impacts metabolism. So there's an association there, but we're really struggling in the research community to figure out the actual causation, like what comes first. And that's what leads us to then look at, can fat people with obesity, with BMIs in the higher range above 30, can they be metabolically healthy? Can they be healthier without necessarily dropping a lot of weight? This is where I think the conversation becomes very rich, in the sense that we need to start looking at what specific behaviors do those people do, not just the weight metric.
Right. Yep. And just to build on that, and is that this goes both ways, right? Like we're really good at assuming that if we see someone who we would classify as overweight, then there are unhealthy behaviors that have contributed to that. If we see someone who we would classify as not overweight, or maybe even lean or super lean, then we automatically assume there are healthy behaviors that have contributed to that. And what we're doing is we're trying to take a very general idea and apply it to very specific people with, like Aaron talked about, there's all kinds of determining factors that we have no control over that come to this situation right now, where maybe you're taking your weight or your BMI or just looking at a body or whatever and making judgments on it. And we have no clue where someone is in that process, what's brought them to whatever size and weight they are at this moment, where they're headed. I mean, there's so many things that go into determining health. And it's really unfortunate that we feel like we can sum it up so quickly by, well, what's your weight, or what's your BMI, or what's one thing about your size, and then I know what I need to know on whether or not you're healthy, whether or not you care well for yourself, that kind of stuff. And so I think it's just important that we look at that. Like there's unhealth on both ends, right? Like this isn't binary. It's not either or. It's a spectrum. And there are people who, I mean, honestly, like we've heard of anorexia, right? Like these are very unhealthy things. And that's on the other end of the scale, right? Not the spectrum, I should say.
Sure.
Not the scale.
Yeah.
And that doesn't, like, there's unhealth on both ends. And if it's a spectrum, then there's a lot of different places that people can sit on that spectrum. And it's really hard for us to determine where they sit on a healthy spectrum from one piece of information. But that's what we as regular people do, because that's what we assume. We think that's the way it is. And I think Aaron's right. A lot of that has maybe come from BMI. I think a lot of that has come from diet culture too, in just insisting that smaller is better, smaller has more worth and value and is healthier, and bigger is worse. And it's just, that's the way it is. And I think it falls apart really quick if we step back and look at it. And I think the problem is we all work within this sort of mutually assumed thought construct, whatever, this is the way it is. But once you step back a little bit and look, like, it's not either or. There's a spectrum, and there's a million places you can sit on that spectrum. And just because someone is here on a spectrum doesn't mean we know anything we need to know to determine their health. So I think it's a good healthy dose of those two. I think it comes from a good place in the medical community trying to identify things, and because that's what they do, and that's good. But as we learn better, hopefully we do better too. And then also just this sort of, like I said, mutually assumed, idea of bigger's worse, smaller's better.
Yeah. Well, and you're exactly right. The assumptions that go into all of that are really, I think, a challenging topic, because I was just having a conversation with friends recently about a social media influencer who was presenting themselves in this kind of brazen, almost defiant way. And this person is in a fat body, and so they are presenting themselves in this manner that, like, I am who I am, and obese people need to be accepted and have a place in this industry and in this world. And it had to do with recreation and access to opportunities that thin privilege often gets us, like access to like wearing the right clothing and having the right equipment to, support a heavier body. And the theme I kept hearing from my friends was, it would be more acceptable to receive this message if that person was doing everything they could to be a healthy person and lose weight. And I kept hearing that, like, if they're trying to lose weight, if they keep trying to be as healthy as they can be and lose weight, then I'd be much more accepting of this message and of this person. And I'm like, oh man, this is so tricky, because I can see where that perspective comes from. And it comes from a place of highly valuing caring for your physical body and your health. It also comes from a place, unfortunately, of assuming that if somebody is fat, they don't care about their health or their physical body. And this is going to be really hard for some of you to reconcile with. And I appreciate how difficult this is to understand this and have this conversation, but we can't assume that someone who has a higher BMI, is obese, has obesity, whatever, is in a larger body. We can't assume that they do not care about their health and that their behaviors have specifically led to that. And unfortunately, obesity is a very visual manifestation of, presented to the world. And we make assumptions off of that. We assume that that person is lazy. That person eats like crap. That person doesn't care about their body. Maybe we even assume that person, is self-harming or has issues, quote, or, we make all these assumptions, and it's really, really hard to unravel that, because that's been conditioned in us from diet culture and our society. And I even presented that, would you have the same kind of disdain for someone who is thin and saying like, oh, I can eat whatever I want and I can do this, and kind of had a flippant sort of, approach to, quote, health and taking care of their body. And, it was said, oh yeah, I would still be, irritated at them, and I would still be upset. But I just got the impression that it's very subtle, the way we have this fat bias. Yeah. And I think it's worth everybody just taking a look at some of the assumptions that you make and the thoughts you have around that.
Yeah. I think it's very subtle until it like crops its head out, right? Like it kind of rides at this subtle undercurrent that we all just have this place we operate from, and things we assume and just quote unquote know about things. And then you hear it and it's like, ugh, whoa, where'd that come from? Well, it's just there all the time, So I love what you just said. I think that was really important. Okay. So just real talk here. I think this is really important. So I think that for pretty much all of us, the reality is that we operate within some beliefs or constraints or whatever of diet culture. Okay. I think this is what we grew up in, and it's myself included. Okay. I feel like I've done a lot of work over the last few years of recognizing those messages and that messaging, recognizing sort of what's been downloaded onto me from very early age that I don't want to believe, places I don't want to operate from, just really doing a lot of work of recognizing it in myself and, exteriorly, that's not a word. And, outside of myself, the way I communicate with clients, what they communicate and how I can help them see what they're really saying. Just done a lot of work there. So all that being said, I still find myself at times doing a knee-jerk assumption or reaction to a particular body, right? Now, I don't believe that. I don't believe that's the case, but I've been so steeped in it that that's still where, even after years of really trying to be mindful of this stuff, you just naturally kind of immediately go sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I hate that. I hate that that's there still, but it's there. Right. And so it's important for me to continue to recognize when it's there. Like I could say, I've worked really hard at this. Okay. And I've got this now. And so now I just don't do that anymore. And then what happens is I stop growing in my awareness and my ability to like respond kindly to myself and other people, and set aside my assumption and think different thoughts and react differently than I want to, because that's how I change sort of this operating system. So I think it's really important to recognize that you probably have unfair and false biases and beliefs about different size bodies. It's okay that it's there. It makes sense why it's there. Like there's a reason that we all think the same thing. And it's because it's just been imposed upon us in subtle and not so subtle ways for probably your entire life. So there's no value in beating yourself up for like thinking these things. There's a lot of value in being honest with yourself and going like, yeah, I do think when I see a fat body, I assume these things. When I see a thin body, I assume these things. That's okay. That's good. You're aware now. This is like the best first step, is to become aware of when you're repeating these messages. And then what you get to do is go, okay, I recognize that not as like my conscious actual thought. I recognize that as sort of like my baseline primal response from just the operating system I've had growing up. And then you get to recognize it as that and then go, but I want to think this instead. So instead, I'm going to, a lot of times, honestly, like verbally for me, I'm going to say it out loud, what I want to think, what I really believe about those bodies. And so now I get to take my beliefs that have changed over time and begin to work kind of backwards with them into changing my operating system. And the more I do that, the more I operate from those new beliefs. So this is a process. Don't expect it to just, go away real quick. But I think it's really important that we're honest with ourselves about the things that we have knee-jerk responses to, that we just sort of like automatically assume or believe. And we can't really do anything with those until we're really honest about where we're at within, diet culture and our awareness and how we view bodies. We've got to be okay with letting things we don't want to be there and recognizing them, acknowledging them if we're going to do anything different.
Yeah. And that's such an excellent point of building that awareness around our blind spots and our biases, that we obviously they're blind spots because you don't know if they're there. You don't recognize them. And so it does take a lot of effort and work to become aware of them and then start dismantling them in different ways, or at least responding in a different way. And I'm thinking of two. So I have two more points I want to make. And one of them has to do with a recent occurrence in my professional world in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. I'll get to that in a second, but
it's been like some big waves there.
Yeah, there's a huge controversy going on. So I'll talk about that in a second, because I think it has some pretty significant implications in this whole weight loss conversation. But just real quick to kind of extrapolate on what you just said about, as a health practitioner in the world of, having your client's best interest in being healthier, and also acknowledging that there's this reaction and there's like some automatic assumptions. This is something we see in the research is a barrier to healthcare and access for people who do have obesity, for people who are in larger bodies, that there's this incredible fat bias in the healthcare system. And there have been measures to be more inclusive and to be more body conscious. You might notice when you go into your doctor's office now, there might be like chairs that are sort of the size of maybe a traditional love seat, or like maybe two standard chair widths or something like that. There might be, I've seen doctor's offices that have little placards on the scale that say, if you don't want to talk about your weight today, we don't have to, that unless it's medically necessary. We don't even have to take your weight unless it's medically necessary. And I think this is an important conversation to have, just again, building that awareness and realizing that, if someone needs a larger MRI machine because their body doesn't fit in a traditional MRI machine, I mean, are we operating under the assumption that that person has full control over their body size, and so they shouldn't be allowed access to that healthcare? Right. Or are we operating under the assumption that every human deserves access to proper healthcare? And this person's story, like, would you be more compassionate if this person was like, look, I have tried my entire life, I've yo-yo dieted, this is where I am, I'm doing all these healthy behaviors? Would that person then be okay? Oh, we'll build a larger MRI machine for you. But then this other person who has a different story, no, we're not going to allow you to have access to that. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I think that's another piece that just gets on the grand scale of access to healthcare, and people being willing to have open conversations with their healthcare providers because they have been met with bias their entire lives because of their body size. I think that's a very real and tangible concept to wrap your head around. I have not experienced that being in a smaller body. I don't have those assumptions made about me. What is it like for someone who walks into a doctor's office and has an anxiety response or a trauma response because they've had comments made their entire lives? They know they're going to be told to lose weight. And instead of focusing on the health of this person, they're focusing on the size of this person. And I think that is a huge issue in our healthcare system.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great illustration you just made about like an MRI machine, because then you have the assumption. So you take someone who is, just thin or, somewhat skinny, and they have more of a right to healthcare because of just the size of their body. And we assume that maybe they're more deserving because obviously they've engaged in healthier behaviors. You know what I mean? Yes. And so, okay, this is a theoretical situation, but it's this, I guarantee this exists out there. Okay. Is that you could have two people who engage in the same kind of behaviors, right? And it manifests differently in their body. It manifests differently with body weight for a variety of reasons, million reasons. Okay. But then we're going to determine who's worthy of getting healthcare because of how the same behaviors manifested individually in them. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so we're punitive towards bigger bodies. There's inherent societal punishment for bigger bodies that, like you said, like I've never had to experience, but I know they're there, because once you start thinking in these ways, you see all the little flaws in the plan. And once you start talking to people and they really open up about what it's been like to live in a bigger body for 10, 20 years or their whole life, and the automatic things that are assumed about them, the automatic things that they just get excluded from. And I understand it's more complex than this, but at the same time, it's unfair. It's just simply unfair. Yeah. And there's a lot that goes into remedying this. And there's a lot, that goes into the way we think about bodies and the different sizes. There's a lot practically, it's a very practical thing to make bigger MRI machines. Sure. I get that. Like there's some work we need to do. Right. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. That doesn't mean that just because we've done things a certain way that we should just continue to do them that way, when we see the real negative and incredibly harmful effects of how we're doing things. Like we just have to be open to changing that if we're really at all interested in the health of a person. If we're not, then okay, that's a separate story. And I think that's maybe where a lot of this winds up lying is it's pretending to care about the health of people. It's we care about the health of you if you meet these requirements.
If you're doing these
then we're
things,
super interested. If not, well, shoot, looks like it's your own fault.
And we're kind of back. Yep, totally. And we're kind of back to that chicken and egg theory. Like, has somebody arrived at this unhealthy status where they do have all these metabolic risks because, and I have this whole list of documented weight bias factors that we see in the medical literature, things like barriers to healthcare utilization, the MRI machine we were just talking about, assumptions about weight gain, what the doctor assumes, what the staff at the hospital assumes, what they tell the patient then to do about their weight gain, expectation of differential healthcare. So someone who is thin gets different, messaging and different access, doctor shopping because they're not the person with obesity or in a larger body encounters bias. It makes them feel icky and they don't feel heard and seen and really cared for. So they're doctor shopping. And then we see this terrible, gap in healthcare coverage and
really disrupts care.
Continuity of care. So that's an issue. Low trust and poor communication. So people are very unlikely to follow up with their doctor on specific questions and clarification on things and maintain that open line of communication because they're being met with this, these assumptions and this bias. And so there are very real, tangible impacts from this. And we talk about the burden on our healthcare system from various things. And we talk about obesity being this huge burden on our healthcare system and our financial system, our economy. The lack of access to healthcare, possibly related to bias against obesity, is a real tangible burden on our healthcare system too. And so I think you have to accept the full picture here and not just plant it back on the individual and say, it's your responsibility, it's your job, take better care of your body. How are they supposed to take care of their body if this is what this person is encountering all the time? So,
No, and I think it comes down to this point, which we've said on Middleish before. I think you said, Matt said it a few weeks ago. Like, if you're going to continue to operate the way you're operating and think about these things, in the way you're thinking about them, after hearing what we're saying, because we're painting a real clear picture, right? Like you've got to, I think you've got to consciously, actively dismiss the things we're thinking to continue to think the way you're thinking. So if you continue to do that, guess what? You're being a dick. And one thing about Middleish, we say, don't be a dick. There's no reason to be cruel to people. There's no reason to operate from a place of assuming that they just don't care. There's no reason to operate from a place of assuming that you know anything at all to make any kind of judgment on this person's life or where they're at or what their level of healthcare is, right? Because it's just, don't be a dick, and it's kind of, we say that kind of jokingly sometimes. At the same time, like just don't. Like,
we're serious.
Very serious. Like you can respond. You can just not know. It's okay. Like there's no benefit for you to decide what someone else's level of health is by looking at their body. Like, what benefit does that bring to you? And I'm not saying this in a judgment way. I'm saying this in a, like, just be aware of it. Like it's really bringing no value into your life. And all you're doing is reinforcing to yourself. Really, this is all you're doing is reinforcing to yourself, because you're probably not communicating this to the person whose bodies you're making judgments on. So you're just reinforcing the flat out lie to yourself that bigger is worse, smaller is better. And then reinforcing your belief that that's the system you have to fall into to have worth and value. And you're really just, you're really being a dick to yourself when it comes down to it.
Don't be a dick.
Don't be a dick.
So real quick, I just want to highlight what's going on in the academy right now, because there's this whole uproar that started a few weeks ago, where the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is the governing body of registered dietitians in the United States, comes out with different position stands, different evidence-based practice papers, and they have an evidence analysis library where they, get committees together and pore over the research and come out with these best practice, kinds of initiatives and guidelines. So one of the most recent ones on weight management. Now, I want to preface this by saying there is still such a large contingent of practitioners, doctors, dietitians, nurse practitioners, you name it, in the healthcare industry, who are very much focused on weight management. And I am not vilifying those practitioners at all, because I think that a lot of that comes from doing what those practitioners believe is in the best interest of this person's health, based on some of the evidence, based on the lens through which they see their role in healthcare. So I'm not going to sit here and judge people who continue to work in that space, because I can understand where it comes from, because I was educated to operate in that space as well. So I can understand where that comes from. Now, the Academy came out with their weight management guidelines recently and opened it. I'm kind of probably missing some of the details here, but they opened it up for public comment. And one of the specific recommendations that was highlighted is that the health at every size approach, HAES, HAES, is not an appropriate intervention for weight loss. And this caused a huge uproar because, number one, HAES has never been promoted as an intervention for weight loss. In fact, the HAES approach is specifically disregarding the emphasis on weight loss. It is specifically creating a space where all bodies and sizes are treated equally in the space of health, and really encouraging healthy, holistic practices for the human, regardless of size. And I'll link something so you can read more about HAES. We don't have enough time to really go into it too deeply, but ASDA is the Association for Size Diversity and Health. ASDA.org. I can put that in our show notes so you can read more about it. We talked a little bit about this with Mark Breeden, because he works with, badass lifters, what's his website? I just drew a blank. You would know.
I'll look it up. Yeah, I'll look it up.
Anyway, sorry.
He really, he de-emphasizes, he actively
size and
does not pay attention to weight loss.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So first of all, HAES is not.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Who's lifting today is his podcast.
Who's lifting today's?
Yeah, I can't remember what his.
So it's okay. Okay. Well, so Mark Breeden, we interviewed him just a while back. So he talked a little bit about HAES and his approach there. I think it's a really good listen. The other piece is that, the HAES community is sitting here going, look, we realized that there isn't a space for body size acceptance and anti-weight bias and protecting that population. And so we created a space, and now here's the Academy all up in our grill about how we're not a weight loss method. It just, it felt like an attack personally on the HAES community. And I've listened to some great podcasts and interviews, and I've read a lot about this because I'm very engaged in this conversation, because I can definitely see how this was poorly received. And then I had a conversation just last week with a dietitian who is a leader in the, the policy, basically the policy manifestations of the Academy, and knows those people on those committees that you personally that are having these conversations. And she was like, I feel really terrible that this was so publicly outed in a way, because those conversations about looking at the evidence, I think what happened is that there was some assumptions, or some practitioners that were promoting HAES as kind of this not necessarily a weight loss method, but like maybe in a sly way, kind of saying like, this is going to be the answer to, your weight loss journey or woes. And so the Academy felt compelled to look into the evidence and say, actually, is this a method for weight loss? And to say it isn't. Now, whether that is valid or whether that is just a defense statement, I don't know. But in my perspective, I think we are seeing a very important conversation unfolding in the dietetics community, in the nutrition community, and in the weight management community. And just being very clear on what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to improve the health of people, or are you specifically targeting weight management, which has some different implications, as we'll talk about here in a second. But anyway, I just wanted to share that whole controversy with everybody.
No, I appreciate you doing that, because it's been something I've been on the sidelines of, last 3 or 4 weeks, something like that. When did it come out? A month ago?
Yeah, it was something like 3. I think I got notified about 3 weeks ago.
Okay. So yeah, it's not anything that I've like really, dove head first into, but there are a lot of people I follow, who have been really outspoken about it. And so just doing some reading and some listening kind of on the sidelines, and it's been interesting for sure. And I think as a quick like caveat, like this kind of pertains, but I think it's worth mentioning that, when medical associations, when medical communities or scientific communities, when they make recommendations or when they have guidelines, that kind of stuff, I think it's important as just a regular person to remember that these are made from a very specific point of view. Okay. And usually with, I would say, very clear, very specific intentions. And I think what a lot of times what they miss is the emotional implication, the mental implication, the practical implication. How does this actually play out in someone's lives, right? I think a lot of these recommendations come from, I don't mean this in a negative way, but kind of cold places. We're looking at data and then deciding things based on data. And that's not a bad thing. It's limited, right? It's a limited piece of the picture. It's probably important to consider and see how it plays out in the big picture. But it often doesn't consider all these other things, because that's not the scope of practice. Like doctors aren't worried about how this, may impact your emotional health or how this relates to the stories you tell yourself around food. Okay. And it's a separate argument whether or not they should be. I'm not getting into that. But usually these things come from just a very kind of cold, removed place of looking at data, and let's make recommendations based on that. It's important that we then look at that in terms of that. This isn't all encompassing. This isn't saying, even if they're saying, we shouldn't take it as apply this carte blanche, right? Just whatever it is. And then however it makes me feel, I just have to wind up dealing with. Like, that's part of the problem already. So it's important to look at this and then go, okay, so how does this relate to me with my emotional health, my mental health, my day-to-day, my lifestyle, all these things. It's a piece of the puzzle. And I just think it's important to just throw that out there, that we need to look at recommendations and guidelines as that.
Yeah. Which brings us to, what are the healthy behaviors that we know reduce chronic disease risk and contribute to overall health? Aside from the whole weight conversation, because I think we've built a pretty solid case that weight does not equal health. Yeah, so what does equal health? We win. So what does equal health?
We won the case.
I know, exactly. We're done and dusted.
Didn't know we were lawyers, did you?
Yeah. So I'm going to cite this article by Matheson and others. That is from 2012. And it's basically looking at data from NHANES, which is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. It is done periodically. I'm not sure on, however many years it's, gathered, but they gather this information like every so often on tens of thousands of subjects and look at associations, causations, just different health metrics on this wide population of people so that we can understand better about, total health patterns. So, this is basically saying that there are 4 healthy lifestyle behaviors that directly impact health risk aside from BMI. Now, the 4 behaviors are eating 5 or more fruits and vegetables daily, which we talk about a lot, exercising regularly. And by regularly, I mean, the general recommendation is 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week at minimum. That's at minimum. More is better. Consuming alcohol in moderation. And I will add, if you choose to consume alcohol at all. This doesn't mean if you don't drink, start drinking.
Are you
in moderation.
drinking enough alcohol?
I know. Are you drinking in moderation? Make sure you do that. We know that alcohol is tied to several health risks, and abstaining is better than moderate drinking. If you choose to drink, moderation is the key. And moderation means 7 drinks a week for women, 14 drinks a week for men, which I think is quite a lot. But, some people would argue with me that I want my 2 IPAs a day. And then not smoking. That's the 4th behavior. So we have 5 fruits and vegetables a day, exercise regularly, moderate alcohol consumption, if at all, and not smoking. These 4 things are so Middleish and so boring.
Right.
It's probably like people are like, but wait a minute. What about intermittent fasting? What about bullet coffee? What about,
my macro split?
God. And so this is just, again, I'll link this article so you can read it. I don't have enough time to really go into it in depth, but looking at this and this is the greatest benefits we're seeing in, within people with obesity, if they engage in these behaviors. But then it begs the question. So did the lack of these healthy behaviors in those individuals maybe contribute to that obesity status? And so engaging in these behaviors brings that, moves the needle on obesity. It's possible. So weight loss could become an outcome. And we see that, and we do see improved health metrics with weight loss. But how did they get there?
Right.
How did they get there? What did they do? Oh, maybe they started eating 5 or more fruits and vegetables a day. Maybe they started moving regularly. Maybe they reduced their alcohol consumption. Maybe they stopped smoking. So
took care of themselves.
Yeah. And I think another huge piece of this that you have talked about already in this podcast that is missing in a lot of this literature is the emotional and mental health component that comes with being supported and being empowered to take control over your health and being seen and accepted for a human being instead of the size and the BMI number. I think that emotional component is a huge factor.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Yeah. I think that was a good little bow. Are you good there?
Good little bow. I'm good. I think that sums it up. Yeah.
Okay. Did you get my chat message?
No.
Okay. We can edit this out. I'm sorry. I'm going to wet my pants. I have to go to the bathroom so bad. I've been trying to hold it for like 20 minutes. So I can edit this out. I'll be like 1 minute.
I can keep.
Or if you want to go, we can go on to me and the mundane if you want, if you're good there, or you can wrap up. I'll edit.
If you hear.
Or maybe I'll leave it.
Oh, I have so much control right now because he's gone. I could say whatever I want. Of course, he'll watch this and probably edit out any snarky comments I make. Poor guy, too much coffee.
The best part is that I could hear you the whole time because I left my headphones in.
I was trying to think of like what funny things could I say, but then I was like, this is gonna be a really long episode if I just sit here and la la la.
I was in there just laughing as I'm peeing.
Okay, so yeah,
which makes it easier, by the way.
Yeah, push it out.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we can
I thought
edit
that was
out.
good there. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think those are great thoughts, and I don't know. That just was a good summation for me, in my opinion. I don't really
Okay.
have anything else to add at this point.
All right. And we'd love to hear your opinions on this,
Mhm.
people. So, of course, we'll be throughout the month, we'll be having conversations on Instagram and whatever. Come engage with us on Instagram
Mhm.
Live and,
Yep.
comment and share your opinions. And, if there's something that we haven't already conveyed to you, it's that we are open and curious to having these conversations. And I think that the more we talk about this and understand where some of these, biases and assumptions and viewpoints come from, then the more we
Mhm.
can learn from each other. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. If you have questions about this, like we could answer them on our live in a few weeks when we do it. So,
Yeah. It'll
comment
April
on
20th. April 20th is when we're going to be talking about
the
that. And we'll
live.
be in
Okay.
Boise together. Check that out.
Yeah, we will. I forgot about that. That's right.
Mhm.
Awesome. So comment, on Instagram, shoot us a message on Instagram, middleish_podcast. Shoot us an email at middleish@gmail.com. Just let us know any questions that you'd like us to, answer, or topics, thoughts around this we'd like us to tackle in the live, because we'd love to do that. In fact, just your thoughts may spur a real, good engaging activity or exercise for us to do. And so, yeah, please let us know what you're thinking here, because we'd really love to get that feedback.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
All right.
Meaning in the mundane.
Yeah. You want me to go?
Sure.
I can
I
go.
have
Okay.
two and I can't decide which one I want to talk
Oh,
about. So I'll
brother. Here we
decide.
go.
I'll think about it.
I'll just do
Yeah.
both. Well, I have three. So,
Oh, look at you.
so for me, I'm going to say last week camping. So Sophie and I, we all had little like air mattresses in the tent, right? And Kathleen and Lila had twins. Sophie and I were sharing a queen. And, sleeping in a tent isn't the best sleep you'll ever have, like it's disrupted and, whatever. It's fun sleeping outside, but it's not the best sleep. Anyway, so, just not sleeping super great. And it's cold a few nights and that kind of stuff. But it was every night, probably 3 or 4 times a night, I would wake up to this little tapping on my shoulder from this cute little hand. And I turn over and she'd go, "Daddy, can we snuggle?" Like, yeah, we
Oh
can snuggle. And so
God.
she'd get right here in the crook of my arm and, snuggle up. And then after an hour, it's like, I got to move. And I'd roll over. And then about an hour later, I'll tap, "Daddy, can we snuggle?" And so
Oh my
every night,
gosh.
all night long, I was just reminded of like how she sees me, right? Like,
Yeah.
I want to be close to you. You're going to make me feel safe. You're going to make me feel warm. I'm going to sleep better. Like, there was just this desire for her to be with me, close to me. And that was just a really cool thing to be reminded of over and over and over every night. So that's mine.
Oh, that's sweet. I love it. Oh gosh, which one? I think I'm just going to share probably the most obvious one, since we talked about that I went to Tucson recently.
Mm-hmm.
I have only ever been to Tucson for training camps in the past. And
Mm-hmm.
so my mentality there was very much on in air quotes, like,
Mm-hmm.
meaning I have a pretty full schedule of training. I need to be engaged in my workouts. It's kind of a new setting. And so there's just, when you're riding your bike in different, streets that you're unfamiliar with, there's a lot of mental engagement that goes on. And so it was never really like a recharge. It was a very draining trip to go to Tucson.
Sure.
And this trip was very different because I got to hang out at my friends. I got to just kind of leisurely do whatever I wanted to do. If I felt like swimming, I could go swim for as long or short as I wanted to. I did some of my favorite rides, a new ride that was fantastic. And I got to ride with my former coach and my friend Marilyn, and then I have another friend who's a pro triathlete, Jesse Vonderchek. And these are people that I have trained with intensely in the past and had just a very different kind of, engagement and relationship with whenever I've gone to Tucson. And we just did like this very leisurely kind of chat, social spin. And I didn't realize I needed that connection to that piece of me and my identity, like that triathlon community, that training community, even though it wasn't that like really engaged, hard training, it still was this, like, it feels right. And it just feels like I belong and relatable and
that's awesome.
Easy conversation. And I didn't realize that I needed that piece. I looked at it like, oh, I'm going to go down in the sun. I get to ride my bike. I get to do lemon, and I had this kind of in my head of the association of what Tucson has been to me. But on that bike ride with Marilyn and Jesse, I was just like, oh my God, I needed this connection. Like I needed to tether myself back to this very strong piece of my identity and my past that has been so meaningful to me. So that was mine.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
It's like a whole new thing for you with your whole new relationship
like familiar,
with racing. And
it's like this
exciting.
familiar and like, you're going to Tucson in the spring, which is something I've done, several years in the past, but it was a totally different kind of feeling that came out of it and realization. So
yay. Old things get to be new things. Woohoo.
I know. It's fun.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you.
We hope you've given lots to think about and some good first steps to start separating weight and health.
And we hope to see you on Instagram and, engage with us on the Instagram Live on April 20th, or send us a message or email like Michael outlined, and we will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for your support.
See y'all. Bye.